Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Rosenberg now with Hopium Chronicles, my new fun Substack community that we're building together. This is a presentation I've been doing since 2017 in various forms called With Democrats, Things Get Better. I often say it's the most important, least understood story in American politics today. We'll go about 30 minutes and take your questions at the end. Please hold your questions until the end, because oftentimes they get answered during the course of the presentation. And also to note that, the organization I ran for many, many years that helped fund and create all this work, NDN, shut down in the spring. I'm now doing my political work at Hopium Chronicles. If you're not a subscriber, it's free. Come by. It's a fun community. We're building a powerful, interesting community. We'd love to have you there. This presentation was built, as I said, originally in 2017 as a response to Trump's early speeches, his convention speech in 2016, and the story that he was telling about America that seemed so out of place with the America that I understood. It was dark. He was talking down the country and not lifting it up. And I remember that Ann Applebaum, the great columnist at that point for the Washington Post, wrote a piece in the summer of 2016 saying, this was the darkest speech ever given at a convention by the Democrats or Republicans in our history. And it was really striking to me how much his narrative and story he was telling, I felt, was out of place with the greatness of the country that I felt I was living in. And I think we needed to develop, in my mind, a positive response to his relentless negative sentiment that he was putting into our discourse today. And that's part of the origin of this presentation. Our presentation begins today in 1989. It was the end of the Cold War and the end of communism. A new age of globalization began. I think we forget sometimes how different the world was prior to 1989. And what was significant is that during the course of the time since 1989, we've seen the world change so much. Again, we're all in the midst of it, so perhaps we don't understand, we don't feel it, but we're really living in a completely different world than we lived in, right? In the late 80s, there was no internet, all these other things had not happened. And the story, and with that era that I call the age of globalization, doesn't even have a name, right? It's so interesting, right? We were in the Cold War era, now we've been in the post-Cold War era, and now we're entering the post-Cold War era. But for much of this time, we lived in this age of globalization where the America, Bill Clinton and the Democrats tried to stitch the whole world together around the global system that FDR built originally in the 1940s. And so I think it's important to recognize that if you believe there was this enormous change that took place and how our politics and our country changed so much, it's fair to ask how the two parties done in managing against change. Any of you who run a thing know that managing against change is one of the hardest things that we all do. And a lot of the work I've done at NDN and in Hopium is to help Democrats understand the changes that are going on and to anticipate them and to get ahead of them and to prosper in them. And let's look at how the two parties have done, relative to this period of change. And what you see is that, there's one party that has repeatedly led the country forward and another that's repeatedly failed to do its part. Trump, we should note, given that he's likely to be the nominee of the Republican Party, was the first president since Hoover to have had net job loss on his watch. This is a significant stat that I know the Republicans are actually a little bit worried about. And we also know that if you look at it this way, because when I began this presentation, it had been 16 years of Clinton and Obama, and then, or recently, it was 16 years of the two Bushes and Trump. The Clinton and Obama created 17 times more jobs than Bushes and Trump in their presidencies in the same number of years, right? And Biden now has come along and created all these new jobs, 7 times more jobs than the Republicans then in just 2.5 years. 16 years of Republican rule, we get 2 million jobs, 2.5 years of Biden, 13.5 million. If you look at it by month, which is a slide, a measure the White House uses quite a bit, you can see that amazingly, the Republicans over 16 years only averaged 10,000 jobs a month over 16 years. I mean, last month alone, it was close to 200,000. It's been averaging under Biden over 400,000. Remarkable anemic performance on the jobs front from the Republicans. When you look at the unemployment rate, we've seen that since 1989 and this new age of globalization began, the unemployment rate's gone up under Republicans and gone down under Democrats repeatedly. And in many ways, this is the most important slide of the whole deck, which is that since 1989, there have been amazingly 49 million jobs created in America. 47 million, essentially all of them, have been created under Democratic presidents. This is not a close call in terms of who's been better for the American economy and the American people during this period. GDP growth tells a similar story, right? Republicans focus a lot on GDP growth. It's an important part of their narrative. You saw under Clinton, we got all the way up to 4% over an 8-year period. Biden's been over three times the average under Trump, and certainly better than any of the Republicans, despite all of the headwinds in the economy. We also, during this period, saw extraordinary wealth creation in the United States. As the global economy, our economy went from 1.5 billion, 2 billion people, that we had access to prior to 1989 to 7 billion people, now 8 billion people. Our companies were very well equipped to go global, and we've seen our companies grow, profits grow, our equities here in the United States have soared. And I think we forget a little bit sometimes about how significant this really has been for the United States. It's probably the greatest period of wealth creation in America in all of our history. And you've seen the Dow, for example, when Bush came to office in 1989. I'm sorry, this number's not in there. It fell out somehow. The Dow was at 2,000. The Dow's at 34,000 today. So it's gone up 17-fold during this period. This is an extraordinary sign of success of the United States, that our companies were so well equipped to take advantage of all these new customers all around the world. And we continue, even today, to dominate in every major sector in the world. And we're still well positioned to continue to take advantage of this global economy that Bill Clinton and others stitched together after 1989. And not surprisingly, most of this growth of the stock market has happened under Democratic presidents, right? Under Clinton, you saw extraordinary wealth creation. Obama too. Republicans have struggled a little bit more. Biden's trailing a little bit, but he's got time, right? And certainly this has all been very good news for America. And in terms of wages and incomes, which is what Democrats really care about the most, right, is the distribution of all that wealth. Regular people have prospered during this period. They haven't grown, their wages and incomes haven't grown 17%. I mean, 17-fold, like if you held equities. But certainly we've seen enormous growth of incomes across all races in the country. And obviously it has not been the same, but people have made progress. This notion that working class people have stagnated or fallen behind during this period is not true. I mean, we've seen a substantial growth in incomes during this period. And you can see it here that most of the growth, this is now median household income, has happened under Democratic presidents, right? You saw this huge surge in income under both Clinton and Obama. Obama, took a while to recover from the Great Recession, but in his second term, we saw some of the best income growth that we've seen in modern American history. And so we should be proud of that, right? And we shouldn't, as you notice, what you often hear commentators say is that incomes and wages have been flat for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. This is not a flat line, folks, right? And when we talk about it being flat, we're actually diminishing or degrading the accomplishments of the Democratic Party during this period, who've seen significant wage and income growth on their watch. We also know on an issue that's been well litigated this year on the deficit, right? We've had 3 consecutive Republican presidents have seen the deficit grow on their watch, and 3 consecutive Democratic presidents have seen it come way down, right? The last 3 Republican presidents all had recessions on their watch. and saw the deficit explode. The last three Democratic presidents have seen sustained growth and the deficit come way down. This is, I know, this is a little bit of a myth buster in our politics. It's hard to really put in. I wanted to show this graph because it is a sign of just how badly Trump managed the country. This is the deficit as percentage of GDP during World War II. This is the deficit in the whole post-World War II era. And here's Bush, right, in the last Republican president, and then here's Trump, all by himself, the most fiscally reckless and profligate president in modern American history. Not a big surprise, given his records of bankruptcy in his personal business. And a reminder, just as a basic talking point, that the deficit went up every year under Trump's presidency, and it's come down every year in Biden's presidency. Again, myth busting. And to me, one of the things that is most amazing to listen to the Republicans on television talk is their basic argument is we shouldn't be spending money over in Ukraine, we should be spending it here at home, right? And then the Dems counter by saying, hey, look, we just passed these three huge domestic investment bills making U.S. stronger. We're seeing huge private investment matching the public investment. And what's the Republican response? We need to cut them all, right? I mean, there's at the very core of their storytelling about the economy, it's just ludicrous. And it is, for anyone who understands this stuff, and we've got to do a better job at going on offense on economic issues. And let's also spend a little bit of time talking now about the Biden economy. I've shown a long period of time, but let's talk about Biden a little bit more specifically. We've had the lowest peacetime unemployment rate since World War II, the lowest in over 50 years. 2/3 of Americans who are alive today have never experienced an unemployment rate as low as it's been under Joe Biden. We have this has come down a little bit, but between 1.5 and 2 job openings for every unemployed person. This has set a record. We've never had this many job openings per unemployed persons in modern recorded history. It's a sign of the health and vitality of the Biden economy. We also know that our recovery from COVID has been stronger than any other G7 nation. We also know that our inflation rate is much lower than European nations who are experiencing very similar global challenges. We have started to get real data now that's showing that the investment bills that we've passed, 3 big ones, are having a huge impact on the American economy. We've seen a doubling of real construction spending and manufacturing, and there's now story after story about the manufacturing boom that's taking place in the United States. We have worker shortages all over the US. We just got data today that 26 states are below 3% in unemployment. Some are below 2%. We're seeing the lowest state unemployment rates ever recorded in state after state after state after state. More than half the states in the country now have the lowest unemployment rate they've ever had. It's a remarkable thing. It's one of the reasons why we need more immigrants in America and not more child labor to fill these jobs. Another thing that I've really written about a lot is also the new business formation we're seeing. I don't think enough literature, there hasn't been enough discussion of this. We're seeing very, very elevated rates of people starting new businesses, and whether this is work from home or however we understand this, this is obviously an incredible sign of the health and vitality of the American economy today. We also know that under Biden, we've seen the lowest uninsured rate and the lowest poverty rates in all of American history. So we've had the lowest unemployment rate, peacetime unemployment rate since World War II. The only times it was lower than it is now was during the Vietnam and Korean Wars. And we've also had the lowest poverty and uninsured rates in American history. Now, we also know that inflation has come back basically down to pre-pandemic levels. We'll see how this continues to go, but all signs are headed in the right direction here. The Fed has even announced that they may be done raising interest rates. This has all been very positive, and it's one of the reasons that Joe Biden's argument for his reelection has gotten so much stronger, because inflation, we're now back to positive levels on wages and real earnings. This is something that I think, some of the impact of inflation in the last few years has been a little bit exaggerated because wages had gone up so much. And so inflation wasn't biting as much as everybody was saying it was. We've seen very, very elevated levels of wage growth during this period. It's coming down a little bit. This is what we wanted. We need to slow the economy down, have a soft landing and not have it crash into a recession. And so this number that's coming down is good, right? We want this because wage growth was so high. everything is looking like we're getting to sort of now on the other side of COVID and back to pre-pandemic levels and more normal levels on the economy. But this has been, we know that the bottom 50% of American workers have seen the biggest wage and income growth. It's been a very kind of democratic economy in that regard. And we also know, because of the investments that we made in the American people to help them get through COVID, is that many Americans have more cash in the bank today than they've ever had. And it's this sense, and it's one of the reasons you're starting to see consumer confidence numbers increase so much. We also saw consumer spending this past month actually increase dramatically, another sign of health and vitality in the economy. You know, people are actually doing much better than is really the conventional wisdom in Washington. Hold on. And we also, this is a slide I've found and I've been promoting heavily, is that this is a survey of worker contentedness. It measures 27 or 28 different measures, and people today, workers are happier today than they've been since this survey began in 1987. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we can talk about. We also know, and I'll be talking more about this, that we're seeing huge strides in clean energy development here and around the world. We need to go faster. We're in a race against the warming planet. But obviously, many of the investments that we've seen, and I wrote a whole post about this week, we're seeing record both government investment and private sector investment accelerating the clean energy revolution that is necessary. Very encouraging. And I throw this slide up, and I sometimes get criticized for this, but this year will also be the year where we've produced more oil domestically than any year in American history. One of the central attacks the Republicans make is that somehow Biden has waged a war on energy, and yet we're having more renewable production and more oil production than any year in our history. So if he's waging a war against energy, he's doing a pretty poor job. We're seeing all sources of domestic energy in the United States increase. This is what we should want. We're more energy independent today than we've ever been, thanks to Joe Biden's far-sighted policies. We've also seen the trade deficit come way down in recent years. Very encouraging news. And crime rates, and this is another area of significant engagement between the two parties, crime rates today are far lower than they were a generation ago. And even though there was a little bit of an uptick during COVID, by any historic measures, the country is far safer today than it was. And we know that murder rates are actually higher in Republican states, not Democratic states. So much of this storytelling around crime is such race baiting, right? It's race baiting. It's not based on actual data. It's far more dangerous to live in Republican states than Democratic states. And we also know the murder rate this year has come way down across cities all across America. So I do think that, one of the things I like to say is, and then the border, right? Biden's border plan that he promoted, that he launched in May, has slowed the flow to the border. The Washington Post had a story a couple of weeks ago saying the border's eerily quiet. It's enormous policy success for the Biden administration. And we have to recognize that one of the central, attacks on us being that we are for open borders. During the Obama-Biden administration, the number of undocumented immigrants in the United States actually declined. We've had different, challenges now because of COVID, because of asylum seeking, because of lots of other things, but we don't have a track record of being for open borders. It's a silly argument, and one we have to rebut far more aggressively. And so how are we doing in America, right, under Joe Biden? We're doing pretty well. I mean, however you make, whatever your set of data is, things are going well in America today. And we should be proud of our president, proud of our party for having, entered during a time of COVID and domestic insurrection and incredible domestic uncertainty without a legitimate and serious transition, the first not successful transfer of power in American history. Despite all of these, the Ukraine war, despite all these challenges, right, America has come out of this doing very, very well. And we've had a really good summer, everybody. Republican talking points, however, on inflation, crime, on immigration, the border, on Ukraine, they've had a really bad summer. And I think that Joe Biden's case for re-election has gotten much stronger, and the Republicans have Trump. And I'd much rather be us than them. And remember that all this good stuff that I just showed you, lowest unemployment rate, peacetime unemployment rate, lowest poverty rate, lowest uninsured rate, right? All this stuff I just went through has happened during a time of incredible migration. And so the arguments Republicans and Trump have been making in particular, that all these immigrants coming into the country have somehow pushed us into decline, the exact opposite's happened. We're doing better today than we've ever done. And it's because of the health and vitality that have been of immigrants that have helped spur our success in the United States. It's the exact opposite of what Trump has said. And I think legal immigration in the United States, all measures people look at immigration have gotten much more positive. I think Trump forced people to really think about it. There's tons of polling on this showing that people are very pro legal immigrant. And even in 2016 in the exit polls, when people were asked when Trump won, there was a question on the exit polls, is that do you want the undocumented immigrants in America to stay or go? 70% said stay, 25% said go. So we have a very liberal attitude towards immigrants and immigration in America, despite the rhetoric from the right. This is a way that I think Republicans are pushing themselves away from the electorate. And we also know that on the issues around globalization and trade, our party is still very internationalist, very global, very outward looking, while the Republicans have become much more xenophobic and protectionist in their orientation. So by many measures today, life is better than it's ever been, and perhaps in a long time. We should celebrate this progress. We need to learn how to take wins in America while also saying there's more work to do. And our success as Democrats has not just been in governing, it's been in politics too. And I'm going to try to go through this section a little fast because I'm looking at the clock. I went a little slow today. Since 1992, Democrats, we had lost 5 out of the 6 previous elections in 92. And we lost some of them by enormous margins. The only election we won from 68 to 92 was 76, Carter, right after Watergate. He barely won. Since 1992, we've won more votes in 7 out of 8 elections. No American political party's done that in American history. And we've averaged almost 5 points, 4 points more than Republicans in these presidential period, almost at 50%. And in 2022, we have to remember what an historic election this was, right? We gained ground in the battlegrounds, picked up seats, right? We outperformed Republicans in ways that nobody expected. It was a tremendous showing for the Democratic Party. And we've seen that momentum that we have, that strong overperformance, continue on into 2023. We had a very good election in 2022, and 23 has also been terrific for us. And when you look back at party ID over this period, going back to the Cold War, the country's been much more Democratic than Republican. Right? It would make sense. I mean, look how well we've governed. Look how much they've struggled. There are more Democrats in America, but we have more episodic voters than they do, and we'll get to that in a second. And so, if what I'm saying is true, right, that during this period since Reagan, we've done a good job, they've done a crappy job, right? Then people who came of political age during this period should be more Democratic than Republican, right? It's just sort of a lived experience thing. And that's exactly what we find in the data, that there's been a huge change in the political orientation of young people. Young people were a swing group during the Clinton era and the Bush era. But after 2006, and I can get into more in the Q&A, when I and others began to identify millennials and Hispanics as these areas of enormous opportunity for Democrats, we've built a politics reaching young people, and we've now seen enormous margins now with people under 45. This is really important to us. That's why I'm promoting a national voter registration drive for voters under 45. We need to make sure that people that vote for us the most, who vote the most, the people who vote for us the most vote the least. We shouldn't accept that. We need to change that in this coming year. And I want to just go over this data because this is really important for us, right? From 1948 to 2004, we only broke 50% of the vote, 50.1 one time in 1964. Right? The Republicans did it regularly during this period, right? We struggled at a national level in ways that I don't think people really remember or understand today. And we're sort of, FDR's incredible performance kind of obscured a weaker performance after his presidency. Remember, we only received 50.1% in both 1960 and 1976. Clinton only won with 43 and 49%. So from 1992, when we began this new popular vote run that we've been on, we averaged 47% of the vote. Since we embraced this new electorate I was discussing earlier, we've averaged 51% of the vote. The last time that we averaged 51% of the vote in 4 presidential elections in a row was all the way back during FDR's presidency. We are the majority party in America. And what I talk about now is that we need to be building on that success and try to get to 55% in 2024. And part of what's happening is that older, more conservative boomers are being replaced by younger and more progressive millennials and Gen Z voters. This is important. This is every 4 years, the electorate gets 1 or 2 points more Democratic because of this basic dynamic. So despite all of this, by the way, that I just showed you, 47 out of 49 million jobs, right? Growth, blah, blah, blah. Republicans are still beating us in the economy. And this is something we've got to deal with. Under Biden, this is the exit poll in 2020. Biden won COVID voters here. You can see it. 41% of COVID voters of the electorate said COVID was number one. We won those voters 3-1. That's why he became president, right? But among voters who said the economy and jobs are most important, Trump won those voters 4-1. So Biden came into the presidency with a little bit of a deficit, a structural deficit in people's understanding about his relationship to the economy. And this deficit has continued throughout his presidency. I could show you slide after slide after slide. This is June of 21, right? And you can see Biden's here plus 27 on COVID, plus 20 on healthcare, plus 4 on the economy. Not good, right? Not good. And then here, this is now just from a few weeks ago, Biden and the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, jobs in the economy, Republicans have a 5-point advantage on inflation. They have a 9-point advantage. We do have advantages in some of these other areas, right? Healthcare, protecting Social Security, Medicare, looking out for people who work for a living, right? But we cannot, we're down 15 points of independence on jobs in the economy. And it's my belief that we cannot have the election we want to have next year, a blowout election, a 10-point win, go big, without getting into more positive, without closing this gap and even getting into positive territory on the economy. This is why in my Hopium work, this is a central obsession, which is we need to be loud and proud and sell Biden's economic achievements as aggressively as we can. So let me conclude. When I built this deck in the beginning, I often talked about how one of the central jobs we have as Democrats is to reject this basic left-right, both-siderism frame. The left-right framework obscures the good work we've done and obscures their awfulness. If it is not true that there's a left and right party and they're equally virtuous and equally full of vice, there's been one really good party and one really crappy party in America since 1989. And we need to do a better job at rejecting all manifestations of this simplistic left-right frame that is so dominant in our daily discourse. We've got to establish this contrast, not of left and right, but of successful, prosperous, forward-looking, and reactionary, failed, illiberal, and all the things that we want. It's my view that this period, to me, feels a little bit like the period after 1945 and 46, when the world had suffered a collective trauma, and that Democrats had just been called to defend freedom and democracy. And I think we're being called to defend freedom and democracy here and around the world once again. Our party rose to that challenge once before. I think we're in the process of rising to it again. I come back in this speech, in this talk, when I try to think about when I'm talking to my fellow Democrats, what are the things that are most important that I want to share with you? I think this speech in 1941, the State of the Union speech, where FDR articulated basically the foundation of what became the modern world after World War II by grounding it in these 4 essential freedoms, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. So elegant, so powerful. This became the core of the Atlantic Charter. This became the core of the United Nations Charter. In 1948, it was the core. These words and this frame was the core of the International Declaration of Human Rights. The entire world has been built upon these universal freedoms since after World War II. And this is the world that the Democratic Party and FDR wanted, a deeply liberal, deeply open world where people had freedoms and it wasn't a world of dominion over them. And what we see is that world that we imagined and built in the 1940s, in which Bill Clinton extended that basic vision to the rest of the world after the Cold War ended, is that we've now seen, we're living in a golden age. There's never been a greater time to be alive in all of world history than in recent decades. We've seen life expectancies explode, not here, but around the world. We've seen extreme poverty reduced. We've had more people living under democracies than any time in human history. This is a golden age. And so defending this global order that our party imagined and built after World War II is one of our most essential jobs. And that global order is being challenged very directly today by Russia and China and other autocratic forces around the world. And it's why this fight for freedom and democracy here and everywhere is a core democratic fight that we've been in going all the way back to 1941 and FDR, right? Even back to Wilson, right? This is who we are as a party. And I will tell you that it's my belief, when you look at this data, that the Democratic Party's done more good for more people than any other organized force in all of human history. And we have brought about, created this golden age. And it's something we have to be more conscious of as we conduct our politics. I mean, look at this legacy that we have. Look at this remarkable, noble project that we are all part of, this thing called the Democratic Party. It's done more good for more people, given more people of opportunity than any other political system ever imagined in human history. And this is something we did, everybody. This is our great legacy. This makes me, every time I look at this, I'm so proud of what we've done, proud to be a Democrat, proud of my president, proud of my country. I mean, I think we have to be far more, reconnect deeply back into patriotism and optimism. It's so critical now as we go forward. And for them, what's their version of this? What have they done during this period? And I think just take a second to read this, right? Because I originally, the way I framed this presentation was that, we'd done a good job, they had failed to do their part, but that's no longer accurate, right? Something dark has happened to the Republican Party. They have become a party of illiberalism and reactionaryism and even fascism, right? We know that in 2021, the Republican Party, not just Donald Trump, but hundreds of Republican leaders, including the RNC chairwoman, set out to end American democracy and to instill a dictator into the United States. This is who they are now. We can't look away. This is really critical to understanding about why we do all of our work to keep electing Democrats. And so remember, folks, when people say what's gone wrong with America, right? Corporate greed, neoliberalism, whatever the views are about what you think has gone wrong. Politics is broken, Washington's broken. I reject that. I think what's gone wrong in the United States is that the Republican Party has been broken. And it's a huge challenge for us, given that one of our two political parties is not only failing to do its part, and that it's been the case for a long time, but is now also descended into something deeply dark, malevolent, that's threatening the country in ways that we've never been threatened before internally. And so I just want to end with this basic reminder of who they are and what they've become. Thanks, everybody. Join me in being loud and proud about the great works of the Democratic Party. We're part of one of the most noble and consequential projects in all of human history. We've been called before to fight for freedom and democracy. We're being called again. And please also, if you haven't, join me on Substack at Hopium Chronicles. It's free. We'd love to have you there. And we go back. Oops. A little off key here. And then I'm going to open up for questions. And just a reminder, these are the foundational words of the modern world. This is words that our party have advanced. It's our vision for what we want out of our societies together, is freedom. Joe Biden, in launching his campaign in April, said that freedom and fighting for freedom was going to be the foundational orientation of his campaign. This is a deeply, deeply held democratic value, and one that I think is going to be able to provide us the framework for victory in 2024. Thanks, everybody. Let me open it up for questions. Appreciate you being here. And hopefully you enjoyed that. Okay, let me just take a sip of water. We'll get to the Q&A. Let me read through the Q&A and to see if there's some some basic themes here. And by the way, my hope is this will be available on YouTube and on Hopium, this afternoon, tomorrow. Share with all your friends. I know it's long, but we're Democrats. We can handle complicated things, right? Not everything has to be simple and easy. Sometimes life is complicated. And what's critical is about coming out the other side of complexity, right? Let me just see. So I don't release the deck for a variety of reasons. What I will do, what you find in all of my writing is many of these slides and these charts and graphs are in my daily writing at Hopium. And I will release probably 8 to 10 of the core slides or the core graphs over the weekend or by Monday. But I don't release the deck itself. And part of the reason is, just so everybody knows, when I did release the deck, people started taking stuff and not attributing it to me. And there's an enormous amount of money and time went into all of this. I mean, this is very valuable intellectual property. And what I will say is that what I'm very proud of is that one of the graphs in here, the one about jobs per month, that is the core slide. That's the core graph used by the White House. I mean, that came from here. And so this stuff has had an impact. And I use a lot of it in, I joke that this presentation is the original source of my Hopium, right? For those of you who are part of the Hopium project. I mean, this is where I kind of relearned and reconnected to the sense of optimism, patriotism, and love of country that is so critical of our work at Hopium Chronicles. Let me just see, there's just so much. Yeah, look, the basic question that is the question that's on all of our minds is, why aren't we getting more credit? Why don't people know more about all of this? And my view is that that's our fault, right? I mean, it shouldn't be that all of you are learning about the 47 million, 49 million today for the first time. I mean, what's happened is that each president tells their own story, and their job is to talk about their administration and what they've done. It's really the Democratic Party's responsibility to tell the story of the party. And I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking. I have an aging bulldog who is grumpy and barks a lot. Part of what I talk about at Hopium is that we have the power. If 1 million of us made a decision to take this data and share it through all of our networks, then the whole country would know about what we've done. We have much more agency than we understand. I mean, if 1 million people, Democrats, information warriors, can reach 10 people, over the course of a year, that's 10 million people. Tucker Carlson at his height reached 3 million people a night and was the most powerful commentator in American politics. We have to stop. We have to do sort of what JFK said, right? Which is, don't ask what the party's going to do for you. What are you going to do for the party? And many of you do your calls, your postcards, your texting, your canvassing, and we've done an amazing job in recent elections because of all of you. But now we have the second job, which is we have to become information warriors. We have to become loud. And I'm doing this presentation and producing this material to help all of you become loud. And as I said in my presentation to my paid subscribers the other night at Hopium, I think the messages I get from all of you on my site that are the most, that give me the most, that make me happiest, is when somebody says, I was at dinner the other night with 3 friends, Democrats, and they started dumping on Biden. Simon, I used your data, and I told them what Biden was doing, and by the end of dinner, I had converted all of them to being, understanding that Biden had been a better president than they understood. And if we can all do that every day, we can learn the data, understand it, get to know this stuff, use other sources. The White House is producing incredible, the White House now is really producing great data. I think, can make a real difference. The second thing is the campaign is going to turn on soon. And there's going to be $1 billion and an entire national campaign that all of us are going to be part of, that are going to be singing from some version of this songbook. And it's going to make a difference. We know from polling that voters don't know what Biden's done. And when they're informed, his numbers go way up. And so I'm very optimistic that together we're going to be able to really move the needle on this in the coming months. I like Debbie asked about the Biden did this. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question about, them. I mean, I love that they're blaming Biden for high gas prices when the people who are pushing gas prices up are the Russians and the Saudis. It's not Joe Biden. Joe Biden actually lowered gas prices by releasing oil out of our reserve. It's really, in some ways, the most dishonest argument in American politics today, the blaming of Joe Biden for high gas prices. Every time the Republicans do that, by the way, they're basically telling people that it's not the Russians and the Saudis, it's the Democrats, it's a lie. And they're enabling and they're strengthening Saudi Arabia and Russia on the global stage every time they do that. It's remarkable how aligned the Republican Party have become with petrodictators all around the world. And it's deeply disappointing. And this is an area that you're going to see me and Hopi start engaging more in the energy issues and the clean energy issues a lot more. I began this week. It's going to be a much bigger part of what we do in the coming months. Roger asked, do some of us want to help how to put out a personal story from the songbook with our community? I want to address that, because there's a lot of people talking about messaging and how to message, and we need things simple. How do you boil it down to 3 points and all this? And what I do is I don't really operate at that level. And the reason why is that in traditional democratic electoral politics, which I've been part of for 30 years, people like me would produce all this stuff for a politician. And at the end of the day, the decision of how to take all this and craft a story and a message was up to the politician, the elected official, because they had to tie it to their own life experience, right? They had to make it personal. Joe Biden talks about Scranton, right? Bill Clinton, the man from Hope. Most of our communications in politics is through the prism of a human being talking about their life experience and then sharing these stories, making them personal and powerful in that regard, right? So for people like us, I helped create the entire concept of talking points, right, during the 1992 campaign. These were all ways to give people who were, talking to voters more information to be more effective communicators. And I think that, to me, what I just want to say to all of you is, when you want to, send talking points around and message, as we call it, and I don't really like the concept of messaging. I really like the concept of arguing, that we make arguments over time the way Republicans do. We have to make arguments. We have to make an argument about the economy. It's not about a message. A message can often feel very ephemeral and light, as opposed to like an argument, which is something you're going to be doing over a long period of time. But when you make an argument, when you move a message, it's got to be personal. You got to feel it. And what's important is that it's got to be important to you for it to be conveyed properly to others. Just sending around talking points that you don't really understand or that you have no personal connection to, it's of limited value in my book. What's valuable is you becoming a student of all this, spending 6 months to really get to know this information, right? Coming on my presentations, following what the White House is doing, engaging with all the other organizations all of you are part of, and learning one piece of this. Pick your piece: jobs, clean energy, right? Choice, abortion, reproductive rights, and just stay there and stay in that place and just keep repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating. It's what I do at Hopium. I'm constantly repeating things. We have new people coming in, we have deeper understanding of things. And I think we have to be less obsessed with message and more focused on arguments, in my view, right? And maybe because I was a Bill Clinton guy who was so good at making arguments, big, powerful, complicated arguments about who we were and where we were going. That's how I was trained. That's how I was raised. That's what I understood. So that was a little bit of a rant. But I want you to understand that this deck isn't simple on purpose, because our life and politics and the country and our history isn't simple. But the goal is to come out the other side of complexity and make something simple and not simplistic. Sometimes messaging makes things simplistic and not simple. And because if you don't understand the policy, if you don't understand the data, you don't understand what's happened, you can't then argue and talk about it. So I'm trying to give you a grounding in what's happened in America since 1989 through this presentation. What's happened in America has been really good. And we've been a really good party. And they really let us down. and they've become a dangerous force. That's the story of our country during this period. And it's a story we have to be loud and proud every day about. Susan, thank you. We'll be in touch. Just be in touch, Susan. Your offer to help. Happy to take your help. Anne has a great here. Recommend reading How Minds Change by David McRaney. I haven't read that book, but I'll look into it and try to get to know it. And yeah, I don't have a way of saving this Q&A. I'm going to get all more. Part of it is I'm raising money now by getting more paid subscribers, which is going to help elevate up some of the production values of what we do here. This stuff is very mom and pop, right? I mean, I'm in my son's bedroom right now, and sorry, my dog's barking. And, you know, I gotta, because the audience for all this is growing very significantly, I've got to, you know, make this all better. And if you become a paid subscriber, you help me, you know, you help me do that. And so please do become. Let me address a couple other questions here. Kamala. Yeah, look, I mean, I've known Kamala a long time. I've done a lot of work in California. When I ran for chairman of the Democratic Party in 2005, she was one of my national co-chairs. I've known her a long time. She's an amazing politician. She's a great communicator, powerful leader. I think that, you know, the job may have been a little bit bigger than she understood when she got in there and got a little bit overwhelmed, you know, having been just recently the Attorney General of California. Not having worked a lot on international and domestic issues, she had basically been a lawyer, right? But now I think you're starting to see her hit her stride. She's doing international events and national security events. She's taking on a big domestic portfolio. You can tell she's just more comfortable in her skin than she was in the first 2 years. And the administration's really putting her out there, and she's doing a good job. And so I think you're going to see her standing rise. And it's important because we need to win next year and win big. And certainly one of the big arguments they're going to be making is that by voting for Biden, you're voting for Kamala to be president. That's obviously not true, but we have to, the stronger she is, the stronger we all are going to be. And it's why our job now, number one job, is to build up the Biden presidency, the Biden economy, Kamala Harris, our ticket. Don't worry so much about no labels and Robert Kennedy and, you know, Donald Trump. It's my view that we're going to win this election in 2024. You know, many things could happen, but forecasting out from where things are today, I think we can get to 55%. I think we can make this a blowout election. I think we can make this a clear repudiation of MAGA, which would be a gift to the country, given how dangerous MAGA has become. But to do that, the most important thing we need to do is to spend as much of our time together talking up the achievements of Joe Biden and the Democrats, and putting positive sentiment into our discourse, and not spending time sending another tweet or text about Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? We need to not, 2/3, 70% of our communications should be about us, not about them. And I think one of these things that I do in my political presentation, but I'll do it now because people are sort of, we're heading there, is I talk about how, you know, we have to get better as Democrats in speaking in declarative sentences. Joe Biden's been a good president, period. The country is better off, period. The Democratic Party is strong, period. No commas, no semicolons, no howevers, no buts. When we do the Joe Biden's been a good president, but, Simon, we're bringing in their arguments into our discourse. We're doing their work for them. We have to be much more disciplined about doing our work for ourselves and letting them do their work for them. They're really good at it. They're super loud. And I think we have been spooked by them. They're in our heads every day. We got to get them out of our heads. Live in our reality, in our truth, in our agenda, in our success. Create a democratic frame. I had somebody say on Twitter the other day, it's like, Simon, when I follow your Twitter feed, it's like I'm entering an alternative universe of truth that is so different from every other place I go. And my view of this is, thank God, that's the whole point, right? Is that we, you know, I helped fight the red wave in 2022 because the red wave is a false Republican generated narrative about our politics. They do this about everything. We can't be responding to them all the time. We just have to go out and be on offense and tell our story and not be responding to them. The war room wasn't about rapid response in 1992. I was there. The war room was about winning the information war every day. And that meant going on offense and telling our story. And then when attacked, responding aggressively. We forget that the way that we get loud and push them into the corner is by being loud ourselves and being loud and proud about all the things that we've done. And my God, do we have a lot to sell compared to what they have. And that's why I'm so optimistic about this election as we head into 2024. Let me see what else. I appreciate all the comments everybody has. And let me just get to this because listen, it's been grateful to be in community with all of you. Been doing this a long time, my whole adult life virtually. And I have come to realize that Democrats now are stronger as a party than we've been at any other time since I've been in this business. And we're strong because of all of you. And there is something miraculous happening in the United States where millions of proud patriots are getting up every day, doing a little bit of work to make sure their democracy doesn't slip away. And this work, this sense of passion and commitment and love of country that all of you have is the reason why we're raising so much money and the reason why we push the early vote to the upper end of what's possible, the reason we're winning House specials all over the country, the reason we just did so well in Colorado Springs and in Jacksonville and in Ohio is because all of you are not letting your country slip away. This is a bottom-up revolution that's happening in the United States. De Tocqueville would have been very pleased if he could have looked back and seen what's happened. Our party is being driven by the money and labor of everyday people because we are a small d democratic party. We believe in democracy. Their party is increasingly being driven by the wealth, power, and privilege of 100 oligarchs. And their politics is increasingly becoming the party of oligarchy and not of democracy. This is really what we're fighting. And so the way that we organize is so intrinsically important to how our politics manifest. And so all this work that you do, the time you're spending with me here today, the calls you're making, the texts you're doing, the money you're giving, the tweets you're sending, the emails you're sending to your 10 friends with 3 of Simon's slides, whatever it is you do, the groups you're part of, right? All of this adds up. There's millions of people doing this. And we have built the most powerful Democratic Party that in my lifetime. It's so exciting to be part of this. I speak to groups all over the country in the last 6 months. I've given dozens of presentations to grassroots groups all over the country. There's been an explosion of civic virtue in America that is so inspiring. And so I want to just close by saying, thank you, everybody. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for giving a shit about your country. Thank you for doing all the work that you're doing every day to make our democracy, make sure that freedom and democracy prevail here and everywhere. We are winning. We are beating them. We are better than them. We are raising more money. We're doing better in the early vote. We're winning elections all over the country. We are strong. They are weak. We're united. They are divided. Now our goal in this next election, we have to focus on the fall with Virginia and potentially, in other races, but Virginia, in my view, is primary with Ohio and potentially other states too. We need to get a ballot initiative in Florida done by the end of the year for the fall of next year, the way we just did in Ohio. That's really important. But then in 2024, we've got to strive to get to 55 and make this a blowout election. I've written a whole memo about how we do that, right? We can do this. We're performing at the upper end of what's possible because of all of you. We need to keep the Senate. We need to win the House back. And we need, for the good of the country and democracies all around the world, there has to be a clear message sent in November 2024 that repudiates this dark, illiberal politics of MAGA. This is why we're in this fight. And so I'm just so grateful for all of you and what you do every day. You're making an enormous difference. Keep fighting really hard, everybody. Share this information with others. Become part of the Hopium community if you aren't. And just thanks, everybody. Have a terrific Friday. Keep fighting. Keep working hard.